Next order of business is the consent calendar. Senator McCaffrey.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, I have the changes.
Senator Goodwin.
On the consent calendar, we take items number 1, 2, and 3 and place that on the bottom of today's regular calendar.
Senator Goodwin, we request that we take items 1, 2, and 3 on the consent calendar and put them on the bottom of today's calendar.
And then I have one adjustment to the regular calendar, if it's now or whenever you want.
Why don't we wait till we get to the regular calendar, Senator Goodwin, and then we'll discuss it at that time? Thank you. Hearing no objections, so ordered. On the consent calendar, Senator Bell.
I had my light on, and perhaps the process for an objection in this case, you're supposed to stand up, but I thought it's to put your light on. If that's incorrect, then I apologize. But I had my light on in order to object to the motion.
You are objecting to the motion, Senator.
Yes, and the reason is I would just prefer, and I didn't want to make it a formal objection, really, but I would prefer, I think it's better if these stay on the same calendar so they're not separated out and not segregated. It's an improvement to have them separately on the main calendar, but I think it'll be exhausting for us to go through a bunch of votes to have to vote on every single marriage solemnization, and it's much better if we just keep them all on the same calendar, unsegregated, treated all the same. I think it's a better process.
Leader McCaffrey.
President, based on your issue last time we were here, we feel we're going to put on the regular calendar so everyone can vote on these individual bills.
You still have an objection?
I do, yes. And again, my understanding of the process is that once the senator finishes speaking, then someone else can get up and speak, rather than sort of other senators can be called in the middle of someone's speaking time. You'll see in the rules there's a right to the floor. But the principle is important, that all marriages be treated equally, and that's important. But it's also important that we not have to separate them all out so someone votes against one and someone votes against the other. We should put them all on the same calendar, on the same consent calendar, and it'll waste so much floor time if we separate them all out. And, you know, when they were separated out in judiciary, I heard from members of the LGBTQ community who were upset about this. And I think it's best if we keep them all on the same consent calendar so we can just vote up or down on the consent calendar, instead of having to have it presented publicly that there are certain votes up or down on one particular marriage but not the other. So I think that's a better process, and I would prefer that that be the process that we follow. And so I would rather that it not come to an objection, but if so, I'll grant an objection.
Senator Nesselbush.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to support my colleague. And, you know, the issue of marriage equality has been heard in this chamber years ago and voted on in this chamber years ago. And it is now the law of the land. And so we want all marriages to be treated equally. For all the 10 years that I have been here, we have put the marriage solemnizations on the consent calendar and voted on them all together, correct? I don't know why. And so I, believe that to now take them off the consent calendar and put them on the regular calendar so that perhaps somebody could vote against a totally perfunctory marriage solemnization bill does not seem to be furthering the interests of equality. So perhaps, I'm so sorry, I was actually out dealing with a piece of legislation and a constituent, and I did come in when my colleague, Senator Bell, was speaking. So I hope by some of the looks that I'm getting that I somehow am not misspeaking, but for years, we have had all of the marriage solemnizations on the consent calendar. At some point, they started to get separated out. I don't think that's a good policy. I think that all the marriage bills should be heard together. And again, these are perfunctory issues of allowing a third party to solemnize a marriage, and to treat them any differently, I don't think is in the interest of justice, and I think it is just sort of counteractive to what the will of the entire chamber was in 2013. Thank you.
Senator Nesselbush, Leader McCaffrey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I concur with you that that is the law of the land, and we're going to allow everyone to vote individually on each of these bills. Last Thursday when we were here, there was an issue with respect to bills being on the consent calendar. So to alleviate and address the concerns that the senator raised at that point in time, we're going to place all those bills on the regular calendar going forward.
Thank you, Senator McCaffrey. Senator Bell.
Thank you so much. You know, on the floor on Thursday, we made an agreement to move it all onto the regular, or onto the consent calendar, not the regular calendar. And there's a very important reason for that. When we bring these out onto the regular calendar, it allows to highlight that certain marriages are being treated differently. And that really continues to bother and offend the LGBTQ community. This is, I think, a really excellent practice, and I do want to commend the leadership for starting the conversation of reforming this, and I had thought bringing all the way to just treating all the marriages the same on the consent calendar. I was really hopeful. I was very happy about that change. I think it shows that this chamber is moving in the right direction. I think that that was a good thing, and I think that we should stick with that and not try and backtrack from it.
Senator Nesselbush.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to stand and, number one, thank the leadership for always being good on these issues from my perspective and any of the conversations that I have had. And absent what happens on today's consent calendar, I think we should just have a meeting with those who are particularly interested in this issue, and I'm quite confident that clear minds will prevail, reasonable minds will prevail, and that we can come up with a solution that I think would satisfy the entire chamber. So that would just be my request.
Thank you, Senator Nesselbush. Senator Sheehan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't going to get up, but I guess we're having some conversation here. We did resolve the issue of same-sex marriage years ago. That is the law of Rhode Island, and I think everyone should be treated equitably under that law. I would also say that I actually would prefer, as a legislative body, that we not do solemnizations, that perhaps we could delegate what is a perfunctory type of function for us to perhaps the executive branch and allow them to do it administratively, therefore relieving us of the burden of doing this every time somebody wants to perform a special marriage. Now, we could make them do requirements, they could regulate it and so forth, but I think that would take it off our plate and probably be placed better in the executive branch. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sheehan. Senator Lynch-Prada.
Thank you, Mr. President. With respect to Senator Sheehan's comments, I agree with him wholeheartedly, and I think this entire chamber does. That's a bill that's been in the Senate many years, and it's always passed the Senate. I think we're all in agreement that this should be an administrative process, but unfortunately, the way the law is written now, it's not an administrative process. It has to be a legislative process. In judiciary, a comment was made earlier that these bills were separated in judiciary. They absolutely were not separated in judiciary. They were each voted on individually. Every single marriage bill was voted on individually. The discussion we had 2 weeks ago now, to the best of my recollection, and I'd be happy to go back and look at the tape, but the suggestion was made that 2 bills were put on the consent calendar and 1 was withheld purposefully. It was my understanding that that was a clerical error and there was never an intent to separate those bills at all. I think what we're trying to do here today is make it very clear that we're treating all of these marriage bills equally, so that we're going to vote on each and every one the same way. So I want to be very clear. My intention is, and always has been, to treat each and every one of these marriage bills equally. There's no reason not to. It is the law. We all agree on that. I think that we've spent so much time talking about it, we could have voted on them 15 times by now.
Thank you, Senator Lynch-Prada. Senator Dela Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if anyone else submitted one, but I just submitted it just a few seconds ago, taking it out of the hands of the legislature, delegating it to the cities and towns, and hopefully that's something that we can get done as a General Assembly this year.
Thank you, Senator Dela Cruz. Senator McCaffrey's motion is on the floor. All those in favor of Senator McCaffrey's motion, please vote in the green. Those opposed to Senator McCaffrey's motion, please vote in the red. Clerk will unlock the machine. If all members have recorded their vote, the clerk will lock the machine. There are 30 votes in the affirmative, 5 in the negative, and Senator McCaffrey's motion is approved.